Over the last few weeks, you would have made a plan for your essay and you would have written the first draft, and now you are at the stage where you need to revise the paper. The revision process within the writing process is actually a very important step because it allows you to make the changes that are necessary to make the paper stronger before handing it into your lecturers for grading. This is usually the stage where you hear people say that they are editing or proofreading their paper. But is editing and proofreading the same thing? Not really. You might hear a lot of people using the terms interchangeably, sure, but editing and proofreading are actually different stages of the revision process. Yes, both demand close and careful reading, but they actually focus on different aspects of the writing and they employ different techniques. But what is true for both, though, is that in order to edit or proofread in a meaningful way, you will need to make sure that you get some distance from the text. And this is because it is hard to edit or proofread anything in a meaningful way if you've just finished writing. So once you are done with writing the first draft of your paper, you will need to make sure that you get some distance from it so that you can re-see your writing. So take a few hours off, a few days, a few weeks, depending on how much time you have left, depending on how far you are in the writing process. Once you are done with your first draft, take some time off so that when you come back, you can re-envision your essay so that you can return with an objective eye and evaluate what exactly you had composed before. Because it might turn out that you might need to make some major changes or some minor changes as necessary to strengthen the paper. You will need to make sure that when you come back, you are able to re-see the paper as if you are seeing it for the first time. Now, we are going to be breaking down the editing process and the proofreading process in two stages. Your global revisions, or what we call your major revisions, will happen in the editing stages of your paper. And here you will look at the content of the paper, the organization of your points, as well as your style of writing. Because all of these larger elements of the paper could stand between you and a well-written paper. Now, in terms of your content, you will need to ensure that you are asking yourself some questions, particularly as it relates to the focus of your paper. So, what is your essay's broad topic? And is your narrowed topic aligned with your broad topic? Is the narrowed topic complete? Does your thesis statement answer your research question? And if it doesn't, then you know that your work is not well aligned. Have you used clear, specific terms in your thesis? Is your thesis sentence all encompassing, meaning that does it indicate all of the points that you plan to develop in the body of the essay? Are your topic sentences directly related to an aspect of your thesis? And are there things that you might have overlooked as it pertains to the type of evidence and the type of sources that you would have used in the paper? Now, if we take all of these things one thing at a time and we start from your narrow topic, remember that the topic drives your content. So depending on what your topic is, that is what is going to decide what should be in the body of your paper. So if you recall, your topic will provide answers to a few questions. So when you are looking at your narrow topic, is there a specific issue that is being discussed? And does your narrow topic say who the issue affects? Does the narrow topic also describe where the issue is taking place? And is there a focus word attached to the narrow topic? So for example, are you looking at the consequences of an issue or the reasons for a phenomenon, or are you looking to give ways to solve a problem? If you take into consideration your thesis statement, is your thesis statement all encompassing? And have you used clear and specific terms in your thesis statement to ensure that your audience isn't guessing what you intend to talk about? And where did you put your thesis statement? It should be found in the introductory paragraph. It's usually the last sentence of the introductory paragraph. When you look at your first draft, are you seeing a thesis statement anywhere in the introduction? Other things that you could consider for your thesis statement is whether or not you have used clear and specific terms. Have you precisely stated the points that you intend to talk about in the body of the essay? Try to avoid vague terms and imprecise words. You want to ensure that when your audience reads your thesis statement, they know exactly what it is you intend to discuss, and they will see your stance or your opinion or a claim that you are making about the topic and the points that you intend to develop to support that claim. When you are looking back to edit the content of your paper, what might you consider as it relates to evidence and types of sources used? First of all, have you used a variety of sources? When you look back at your first draft, do you find that you're only depending on one source? Or even if you have 3 or 4 or 5 sources, are you depending on newspaper articles only? Make sure that you are using a variety of sources, as it gives you different types of information that you might need. So the scholarly information or the research that really backs up your argument and adds credibility to your paper might come from a journal article or from a book chapter or from an authored website, and you might get really good examples from a magazine article or a newspaper article. Make sure that you have source variety. But what if you already have source variety, but you have not used those sources appropriately? So you have copied and pasted without giving credit to the authors. That is known as plagiarism. So you have to make sure when you go back to edit the content of your paper that you are actually using the sources in an appropriate way. You have included your in-text citations according to APA 7th edition, and make sure that you also have a references list that gives the complete information for your in-text citations, so that you cannot be accused of trying to steal anybody's ideas. Did you use a variety of in-text citations, meaning are you dependent on quotations only? Or is it a situation where, in an effort to analyze the sources or lend context to the examples that you have, that you try to summarize information from a source or paraphrase information from a source, and you might have your sprinkling of direct quotation in there? Make sure that you properly introduce the ideas that you're getting from sources. Make sure that you explain or interpret those ideas or examples properly, and make sure that you are doing so as it relates to your topic sentence. As it pertains to organization, this is another global area that you can consider when you are editing your first draft. So what organizing principle guides the development of your essay? Are you writing an essay that is dependent on the comparison contrast principle, for example? Or are you writing an essay that is supposed to be a cause and effect essay? Are you writing a process analysis essay? And based on what you know about those organizing principles, does your essay conform to the organizing principle that is suggested by your narrowed topic or your thesis statement? Have you composed an interesting introductory paragraph that gives sufficient background and ends with the thesis statement? And have you used your body paragraphs to discuss everything that you promised to discuss in the thesis statement? And have you done so in a logical, easy to follow sequence? Finally, have you written a concluding paragraph? What might you consider your introduction? The introduction contains 3 parts. Your reader needs to be interested in your paper, so the first thing that you might want to do is to grab attention. But you can grab attention with a piece of statistic, or you might use a little known fact, something interesting, or you might want to use a quote. But you have to make sure that whatever you are using to grab your reader's attention, that you connect that information to the rest of your introduction. You do not want to leave your attention grabber dangling. Make sure that you give sufficient information that provides the context for the reader, that gives some background information, that might define some terms if they need to be defined, depending on who your audience is. And make sure that you end your introduction with a clearly stated thesis that is relevant to your narrowed topic. Make sure that your thesis also follows logically and naturally from the last sentence before it. You want to ensure that you have a cohesive paragraph that starts by grabbing your attention, that continues by giving you some background information, that sets up the conversation, that tells your reader why the issue is important and why you are talking about the issue, and that ends with what you intended to say in the body of the paper. When you are thinking about adjusting your body paragraphs, some of the things that you might want to consider are if you have clear topic sentences for each paragraph. Look at your topic sentences if you have them, and think about whether or not they actually support your thesis statement. Is there a connection that exists among the topic sentences themselves? Are the body paragraphs unified? If you are using quotes, if you're using paraphrases and summaries, are those things well integrated? Meaning that did you introduce them, or did you just put them in and leave them unexplained? Have you clearly established the relationship between the evidence that you've provided and the claim that you are trying to make in the paper? And did you develop all of the claims that you promised to develop in your thesis statement? You also need to make sure that you think about your conclusion when you are thinking about the organization of your paper, when you are trying to edit for organization. So avoid repeating the ideas word for word from your introduction. You will need to probably find new and interesting ways to tell the reader that your essay is coming to an end, and you have to make sure that your conclusion follows logically from everything that you would have written before. You do not want to end up with a paragraph that sits awkwardly at the end of your essay that seemingly has nothing to do with what you would have talked about before. The other major change that you could make to your paper relates to the style of your paper. You can generate interest in your writing by using sophisticated sentences and words, and a variety of sentences and words that will make people interested in continuing to read your paper. So, do you use a variety of sentences? Do you use a mixture of long and short sentences, or simple and compound sentences, or compound complex sentence patterns? These will keep your readers interested in reading your paper. Look at your paper, look at your sentences, and think about whether or not you are using strong active verbs. And if you are using passive verbs, are you using them appropriately? Are your sentences worded and developed to reflect academic discourse? Remember, you are writing for an audience that is supposed to be an academic audience. You are not writing for a different audience, and you're not writing for a different purpose. If your purpose was to entertain, you might set up your sentences differently and you might choose different words. But because you are writing for academic discourse, you want to ensure that your sentences are worded and developed to reflect that. So, just to remind you, when you are editing the paper and you have written your first draft and you have cleared your head and you're coming back to re-see the global aspects of your paper, remember to check the alignment between and among your narrowed topic, your thesis statement, and your topic sentences. Make sure that you stay true to your thesis statement. And if your thesis statement is vague, you can rewrite it as necessary. Make sure that you pay keen attention to the organization, the content, and the analysis that's contained in your paper. Strive for coherence and cohesion in your paragraphs, and make sure that you are rigorous. You do not have to remain attached to what you already wrote in the first draft. You have to make sure that you come back to the paper with fresh eyes so that you can re-see the draft and improve the draft before you hand it in for your grades. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are major changes and minor changes, and the major changes are the editing that you will need to do. Your minor changes or your local revisions will be when the time comes for you to proofread your paper. And here you are looking at the finer aspects of style, you're looking at your grammar and mechanics, and you are also looking at your APA formatting to ensure that everything is in line with what is expected in your assignment before you hand it in. So the proofreading process is usually the final stage of the revision process. So after you have revised the macro elements, that's when you usually come to revise the micro elements, or that's when you usually proofread. And of course, the proofreading stage involves checking the revised draft for the finer elements of style, for the grammar and writing mechanics, and ensuring that the final draft is polished. Now, as it pertains to the finer aspects of style, you want to look at your word choice. Remember, I said before that based on your purpose, based on your audience, and based on the fact that you are writing for you're writing academic discourse, it means that the choice of words that are contained in your essay needs to be appropriate for that academic audience. You have to check for whether or not any Creole structures have crept into your writing, because even though we recognize that English might not be your first language, and even though we recognize that you might not necessarily be fluent in English, because of the fact that the English language requirement for this assignment means that you have to ensure that when you've gone back to edit and when you've gone back to proofread, that you take out the Creole structures, unless it is that you are giving an example where that Creole structure becomes relevant to your essay. Are your sentences clear and are they complete? When you go back to check, you have to ensure that you have not written any sentence fragments, that you don't have any run-on sentences, that all of your sentence boundary issues are fixed, basically. Think about your tone as well. Is your tone appropriate for your audience and for the subject matter? Are you being objective? The other thing that you have to ensure, which is really quite important, is to make sure that your reader can hear your voice in the paper. You do not want to write a paper where the only thing that you are doing is pointing to sources, where you're saying according to Brown, Jones agrees, where everything is just pointing to source after source after source. Remember, it is your paper. You are writing on a topic. The only thing you are doing is using the sources to strengthen the points that you are making. So your reader must hear you in the paper. As it pertains to grammar, try to pay attention to your known challenges. So if you know you are weak in a particular area, look out for those first. Of course, you can always hand off the paper to a friend to see if anything jumps out at that person that might not necessarily have clicked in your head. But if you know that there are issues that you have with a particular thing, then you can look out for that first. So check your parts of speech, check your subject verb agreement to see if there are issues there. Check to see if your pronoun use agrees with your number usage. Check to see if your verb forms and tenses and your plural forms and all of those things are fine. The same thing goes for checking for your punctuation. So this is what we mean by mechanics. Again, check for your known challenges first. So is it a situation where you know that you usually have an issue using the comma as opposed to the full stop? Is it a situation where you're not quite sure when a semicolon should be used? If that is the case, check your punctuation to make sure that you are using them appropriately. Double check to see when a colon is used, when a full stop should be used, when a question mark should be used, and then go back to your paper to see if the punctuation you have there are being used properly. Check your spelling as well. Now, even though we are taught British English in schools, the reality is that we have so much access to American media that American spelling creeps in. So what I have to say about that is to make sure that you are consistent. If you are using British spelling, make sure you use British spelling throughout your paper. If you are relying on American spelling, make sure you use American spelling throughout the paper. But what we really do not want to see is a mixture of British and American spelling. Make sure you are consistent. Make sure that you also go back and check, proofread for case lettering. So are you capitalizing properly? As it pertains to APA formatting, you have to ensure that you are using the 7th edition as you've been told to do. You have to first of all make sure that you actually have an accurate list of references that's based on the APA 7th edition manual, and of course a handout was provided by the librarians that I'm sure the lecturers will have posted to Moodle for you to use. When you go and look at your references list, are the references in alphabetical order according to the authors? Did you use double spacing throughout your essay? Do you have the correct APA cover page? Are you using the correct publication information based on the sources that you have, as well as based on what APA requires that you put into the references list? Are you using italics appropriately? Are you capitalizing appropriately according to APA? And are you using the appropriate punctuation that's required for the references list? You need to use the resources that are provided for APA to ensure that you get the formatting down properly. Basically, proofreading is going beyond the initial editing, making sure that you check for omission, or making sure that you check for any substitutions that may have inadvertently occurred, or making sure that you check for any unnecessary addition of letters or words. And one thing that can help you to proofread properly is you can read the essay aloud. You tend to notice more mistakes when you read aloud. You can also read it over more than once. You should be reading your paper over more than once. And you can also try to read it backwards. Those things help you to spot any of the surface errors. Now, let us see if we can identify any of the errors in the following and correct them. Now, if you looked at that sentence and realize that has should be the correct word there, remember you have to look out for your homophones. So as and has are two different words, so you have to ensure that you are using the correct word. Now, asserted, APA asks for the use of the past tense, so it would be Green has asserted. And also, because of the fact that this sentence is indicating that the source was published in 1979, which is not the 21st century, it means that it wouldn't be the use of is that is appropriate. It would be the use of will be, which indicates a future tense. Since if I'm writing in 1979 to talk about a century that is yet to come, it means that I am making a prediction. You would also notice that there is a use of the comma after that and another one after century. And this is to indicate that the term in the 21st century is additional information and could be removed from that sentence without affecting the meaning of the sentence. Let's look at another. Now for APA, there is a difference in the use of the word and the use of the ampersand. So you will see in the first example that outside of the brackets, there is the use of the ampersand, but APA requires that outside of the brackets, you should spell out the word and. If the last names were inside of the parentheses, then that is when you would have used the ampersand. You will also realize that the March 15 is removed from the brackets, and this is because this is supposed to be a journal article, which means that the only thing that needs to be in the bracket is the year. APA uses a name year and not name, year, and month in the in-text citations, so that is removed. The other thing that you will see being eliminated is the term in their journal article. That's not information that is necessary. You can just say that they explained whatever it is that they explained. I would have said before in the previous example that APA requires the use of the past tense. So instead of explain, you would have explained. And of course, we would change the pluralization. Since we're talking about more than one woman, we're talking about older women, so it's more than one person. We have to say they are the ones and make sure that that pronoun agrees with the number. And of course, the bys would then become by. Let's try another one. Now, this has to do with the correct use of the parentheses. You usually use the parentheses when you want to add additional information to a sentence. But if you should remove whatever is in the parentheses, the sentence should still make sense. So if we look at the first example with Foster and Lee 2009 in the sentence in the brackets, it means that if we eliminate everything from that bracket, the only thing we're left with would be support this idea. That is not a complete sentence. So it means that we need to complete the sentence by just putting the additional information in the parentheses. So the sentence becomes Foster and Lee supported this idea. The additional information that we've added is the year. If we remove the year from the sentence still makes sense. And again, as I would have stated before in terms of the APA specification, because we are using the last names outside of the parentheses, it means that we need to spell out the word and not use the ampersand. Let's try this last one. Did you find all of the mistakes? Again, we do not need to include an article written by, so we would remove that. APA requirements say to us that we only need the last year of the author as well as the date. So we would be left with a sentence that says according to Boyne, and we would have the year in brackets, since that is additional information that could be removed from the sentence without affecting the meaning of the sentence. You will also see that the page number is put at the end of the sentence, and that is another little detail according to APA. Okay, so here are some final tips for you to apply when you are editing and proofreading. As I said at the beginning, make sure that you get some distance from the text, because it is going to be very hard for you to edit or proofread a paper that you've just finished writing. So you need to make sure that you clear your head of what you've written sufficiently so that you can go back and take a fresh look at the paper and see what is really on the page. You can better yet give the paper to a friend to see if they can read through the paper and identify anything that might be wrong. You could also decide which medium lets you proofread most carefully. So this is my second tip. Some people like to work at the computer. Other people might need to work with a hard copy. So if you are that type of person, you'll probably need to print it out and make sure that you have your pens and your pencils and you mark accordingly. So decide for yourself what allows you to identify the most mistakes so that you can fix them. The third tip that I'm leaving you with is to try changing the look of your document. When you alter the size and the spacing and the color or the style of the text, it may trick your brain into thinking that it's seeing an unfamiliar document. And that way, it will help you to get a different perspective on what you have written. Another tip I'm leaving you with is to find a quiet place to work. So don't try to do your proofreading in front of the TV or while you are on the treadmill or while you are otherwise occupied. Make sure that you find a place where you can concentrate and avoid any distractions as necessary. If it is possible, try to do your editing and your proofreading in several different short blocks. You may not have the time to concentrate on everything at once, and your concentration, more importantly, may start to waver. if you try to proofread the entire text at one time. So try to divide up the work and see if you can come back to it over different periods of time in order to get the most out of your editing and proofreading. And if you are short on time, you may wish to prioritize. So make sure that you complete the most important editing and proofreading tasks first. The things that are going to affect meaning and clarity the most, make sure that you edit those first, if it is that you are short on time. Okay, thank you for listening to this lecture. If you have any questions, we will see you at the webinar.